What does it take to keep 340 million monthly visitors landing on the right job listings without overwhelming Google's index? Chris Reynolds is the SEO director at Indeed, the world's largest job site. Before that, he spent nearly a decade at eBay. At first glance, those two sites might seem worlds apart. One sells products, the other posts jobs. But in terms of search strategy, they're surprisingly similar. And Chris, he's brought a very product-driven, very technical SEO mindset to both. This episode is about how one of the internet's biggest platforms handles SEO at scale. Chris walks us through how Indeed uses machine learning to decide which pages should even be indexable. Think of it as a regression model with SEO traffic as the dependent variable. We get into crawl budgets, the role of internal linking versus XML sitemaps, and how user behavior inside Indeed helps drive what shows up in Google. We also talk about what happens when LLMs, not just search engines, become your discovery layer. Chris is doing SEO in a world where traditional tactics aren't enough, and user expectations are shifting toward AI-generated answers, not just blue links. Whether you're managing an enterprise site or just trying to turn user behavior into smarter SEO decisions, this episode is a masterclass in scaling with intent. Let's get into it. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Page 2 podcast, episode 97. I'm your host, John Clark, and as always, joined by my partner in crime at Moving Traffic Media, Joe DeVita.
Hey.
And today we're welcoming Chris Reynolds to the show. Welcome, Chris.
Yeah, good to be here.
I was doing some research on Indeed, and these are similar web numbers, but 340 million monthly visits, ranked number 55 in the world, number 30 in terms of website size in the US. And then I was going through your job background in eBay, right? Even bigger. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about maybe the transition from eBay to Indeed. I guess what you could traditionally call like an e-commerce site to something like Indeed, where more job driven. I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, but sort of take us through what that transition was like.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was very, very similar. So the structure of a job site or a job aggregator site, in many ways, is very analogous to like a large e-commerce site. So you have individual jobs, analogous to an item for sale. And then you have, let's say, a search page on a job site, which is very analogous to a category page. So actually, a lot of the stuff that I did at eBay was 100% applicable to Indeed. In many ways, I feel like I've been speed running everything I learned at 8 years at eBay for the last 4 years at Indeed. So it was a good running start into Indeed. Let's put it that way.
That's amazing. It seems like on the Indeed side, there might be a little bit more sort of programmatic SEO. Is that fair versus like individual like product listings?
Yeah, yes and no. The sort of fundamental difference in Indeed and eBay's approach to SEO is that eBay has a very well built out ontology of items. So effectively a taxonomist defines like what goes into Google's index, whereas Indeed is much more led by user searches, because as you said, it's a huge destination site. It's the biggest job site in the world by far. People come, and SEO is a minority of the traffic, a relatively small-ish minority of the traffic. So we have all this insight into what users are searching for. And so we let users more or less determine what is the content that we put into Google, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I can imagine there's quite a few challenges just in terms of indexation of really both sites, right? Just being so large. We work a lot with real estate sites, and right, you have properties that sort of come and go. On the eBay side, you have products that or listings that sort of come and go. Jobs certainly the same. Do you have sort of a blanket methodology on terms of how you approach those types of things, or are they unique to, I don't know, maybe how popular the product or the job is?
Yeah, I mean, the core page type that Indeed uses for SEO, if you like, is a job search. So it's an aggregation of jobs rather than an individual job. And behind that, we spent the last 2 years really building quite a sophisticated machine learning model that determines whether or not a page should be or a URL should be indexable. So we use all these kind of factors around, as I say, people coming from other places and searching, the number of jobs visible, how much they interact with them, how much they seem to like them. All those go into a model, and then that's continually learning about what gets indexed and not. So that's the kind of the beating heart of it. And then for individual jobs, because we participate in the Google for Jobs platform, a lot of those jobs are indexable, but not all of them, because kind of one of Indeed's, I guess, core competencies is, I guess, judging the quality of a job. So there's a whole universe of bad and scam and low quality jobs out there. So upstream of even before it gets to a job search on Indeed, there's a whole process where or often it's looked at by a human, or various machine learning models look at it and assess its value. And only at that point, when it gets through all those hoops, do we say, yeah, that's a good job that we'd want to put on the site. And if it's good enough to go on the site, it's usually good enough to go into Google's index as well.
That's super interesting. So you don't publish everything that's submitted.
No, well, if you think about the kind of jobs that people might put on online, there's a whole world of like scams, and I don't want to get into it too much, but when you really lift the cover of, there's a huge bucket of jobs you can look into our internal systems and say jobs that we don't publish, and you look in, you're like, my God, that's a lot of dodgy stuff in there. And so it's almost, Indeed's been around for like 20 years now, and sort of a core competency of the organization is saying, all right, we've scrubbed the whole web for every job that's out there, but what's actually a good job that people might want to actually apply for? And so yeah, by the time that it gets to visibility on Indeed's internal search or something that we might want to put into Google's index, it's gone through a whole bunch of checks before then to make sure that it's a good job. And as I say, on the kind of the aggregation of job side, then it's a relatively small minority of the total number of unique intents that we know about. If you like, combination of a job title or a contract type or a skill or any kind of number of keyword searches, if you like, plus a location. And then we know about a very large number of those. And then we put a relatively small minority of them into Google's crawl path and index and so on.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I was I don't remember where I saw it. I'm sure it was LinkedIn. One of the job hacks was rather than providing a link for someone to actually submit a resume, the suggestion was rather than to submit a resume through, a link, the suggestion was to go to Google, search the brand plus the job title, right? So you're sort of generating brand searches, and then to go to the website directly. And so that was, I don't know if you call that spam per se, but I would imagine that would get flagged in your list of machine learning checks.
Yeah. Is that from the perspective of a job seeker trying to get their application through, or of an employer trying to get more applications?
I think it was honestly it was less about those two things and more about generating brand searches in Google.
Oh, I see. Yeah. There's a pretty well built out set of independent variables that we use to kind of determine indexability. So like you can push really hard on one, but like if it's kind of, I guess, overwhelmed by the others, if you know what I mean. So it's very hard to spam, I guess, basically.
Yep, totally. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the job sort of API relationship with Google. I guess maybe to start, like what has that impact been on getting new job listings indexed? Is it near immediate, or was there any uplift in visibility for those new listings?
Yeah, Indeed historically didn't index individual jobs, and the rationale was really around crawl budget. Like it's actually, Indeed is great to work for as an SEO because the kind of the lineage of it is SEO. So I occasionally get to speak to, very, very rarely get to speak to the CEO, and he'll ask me questions about like index bloat and stuff. And I'm like, well, hang on, you're the CEO of a major public company. What do you think about this stuff? But so even the most senior management in the company, like from very early on, was concerned about sort of SEO hygiene. Historically, the tactic was just not to have individual jobs indexed in order to save crawl and indexation budget and so on. We've made tons and tons of changes. I mentioned the ML model we did. We've cleaned up a whole bunch of internal linking and stuff. So we've effectively, I see it as we've bought ourselves a bit of space in the index and in the core budget to put new stuff in there. So with that, we've had most, not all of the jobs indexed, or at least indexable. And then we really started using the indexing API specifically when moving into Google for Jobs. Google for Jobs is like, it's not like huge in terms of a portion of traffic that we get, but it's a good way of getting jobs there in front of job seekers. So some people use it, and for those people that do use it, then yeah, great, we can help them out getting a job by putting their jobs there. So some of them, I kind of see it almost the indexing API, and for that matter, Index now being sort of semi-open source alternative. It's kind of like a misnomer, really. It's not really, because the name kind of suggests that you just kind of pop in a URL directly into Google's index, but really it's about getting into the front of the crawl queue, I think. So I use this like analogy of a nightclub, which is, you're all there, want to get into the nightclub, which is Google, Bing, or whoever's index. And what something like the indexing API will do is take you from the back of the queue and put you at the front, but the bouncer still has to look at you and check that you're a good fit. of the right age or whatever. You meet the criteria to get in, and only then can you get in. So the crawl is almost immediate for both of those services, but the indexation is not certain. But it's kind of really to participate in Google for Jobs as a job site using in the indexing API is kind of a must, really. Just the scale of it is such that crawl is not going to be, as you mentioned, jobs are quite transient and crawl is just too slow. So that's hence why they have this indexing endpoint. And so that's why we use it. So it hasn't been like a massive business game changer for us. But again, if it's useful in terms of helping job seekers find jobs to put our jobs in that placement, then we do it.
So there is still an authority or sort of a quality threshold, even with the index API that still needs to be, okay.
Yeah.
I was curious, if you're using the API, are you also using XML sitemaps? Like, do you see those things as redundant, or is it still valuable to have those listed across both of those items?
Yeah, we do use XML sitemaps for all the major page types, including individual jobs, but it probably is redundant, to be honest with you, when you're using the indexing API. It's funny, like I say, that Indeed is a very strong sort of tradition of SEO. When I joined, the sitemap XMLs were pretty weak, and I was like, okay, why have we got all these errors? Like, what's going on? And the philosophy was really that internal linking is what counts. And if you're falling back onto sitemap XMLs for discoverability, it means you're not doing your job properly in internal linking. And so it was like a crutch that you weren't allowed to use. And so it was like, sitemap XMLs are for the weak. Just use your internal linking, get it right. But we did do a lot of work to get to the sitemap XMLs, just reliable and complete and stuff. I actually find them most useful for reporting, actually. So we subdivide it obviously by geography and page type and subcategory of page, like a job category, for example. It's super interesting to see what crawl and indexation Google is devoting to those sub pages. That's probably, if anything, that's probably the most useful thing for sitemap XMLs for me.
Yeah, we when we start with a client, one of the first things we ask them to do is to separate out like different Google Search Console accounts, different XML sitemaps based on site structure, specifically for that reason. It's on the reporting side, it's much easier, but on the indexation and sort of quickly identifying key areas of the site that there's challenges, super, super helpful. I wanted to talk about job schema a little bit. I have not worked a ton with it. So I know that there are unique attributes to apply for like a remote job versus something has to go to the office every day. And I know that sometimes not applying that correctly can result in maybe not showing for what you would want to. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a minimum set of fields that are required to appear in Google for Jobs. So we use those on Google for Jobs on individual job pages. And then we go a little bit beyond that, but I might get cast out of the SEO community for saying this really, but I kind of almost see it as an exchange of value with Google. Because I mean, this attribute is not on the page visible to users. It's not helping anyone directly get a job. And so Google will say, hey, tell us absolutely everything you know about all your products. From my perspective, unless that's actually helping people get a job, I'm not going to go out of my way too much to kind of give them more context and information than necessary. So we did a whole bunch of testing in the early days of Google for Jobs where we just added additional fields, added new schema, just tinkered with the values and stuff. Honestly, it really wasn't I don't think we had any kind of real material wins in terms of new traffic coming in as a result of that. So my philosophy has really been, hey, let's just give them what they were, a little bit more than that, but not much, and make sure it's accurate. And then that's it really. So in terms of schema for jobs, we do almost the bare minimum. And then of course we do, well, not of course, I mean, but we use schema across various different parts of the sites for FAQs and stuff like that as well. So we do dot it around the site, but I know there's some people, it sounds like you're pretty expert in this, but some people who really go to town with overlapping semantic relationships and stuff. But from my perspective, I do what's required and no more, basically.
Yeah, there's typically just a small handful of required fields. And then of course, like you said, you can go nuts with layering and all that sort of stuff. Wanted to talk a little bit about keyword research. Is that even applicable for a site like yours where, really it's the job title and you maybe are just bound by consumer interest in that particular title or maybe that company per se? How do you guys think about, keyword research?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the answer is not really keyword research in the traditional sense that, you go and look at a tool and see what people are searching for. Yeah. So as I said, the really nice thing about Indeed being this huge monster website, which is a destination site, is you get a whole bunch of people to show up to the site and then enter keywords into the search box. And that is our keyword research. That's our market insight. And as I say, we have this machine learning model that continually runs and continually tries to improve itself at predicting which of those intents, let's just say like marketing jobs in Austin, Texas, for example, is that going to get any kind of SEO traffic? Does anyone care about that on Google or not? And we use quite a few different independent variables that say that are predictive of that dependent variable, which is the SEO sessions. And the nice thing about it is like as new sort of job titles or locations or anything comes up, it's effectively the users doing keyword research for us. So people always jump to the example of like, oh, prompt engineering, it's a new job. Do you know about that yet? And you're like, yeah, well, yeah, people do search for it. And so, yes, we do have it. We rank for it and it's all good. But more specifically, it tends to be like, I don't know, imagine a new restaurant opens in a small town or something, and then people drive by and see a new restaurant is opening, and they're like, all right, jobs in, new small restaurant. And then effectively, if enough people search for that, we'll be like, oh, this is something that people care about on Google. And so we'll have that linked and indexable across the sites. It's really nice. And then vice versa, if people just stop caring about a specific job title and a company goes bankrupt or stops hiring or whatever, we'll take that out of the Google SERPs. It's kind of a self. I think of it like a plant that grows towards the light. If the light is SEO traffic, and effectively the site kind of grows itself, and we just make sure it doesn't do anything terrible.
I was really curious about the job title. How do you decide what jobs to match to if you're able to talk? I mean, not the actual formula, but like, maybe I'll ask it a different way. Is your machine learning model understanding that, SEO director might have sort of a similar relationship to, I don't know, senior manager, right? Like
Sure.
SEO senior manager. And so if I do a search for SEO director, you're sort of combining the listings across those types of jobs. Is that like a fair way to think about how you're trying to map jobs together? Because I think that one of the challenges that must be is that companies have, it's like e-commerce, right? Where you sort of name the product some name that has nothing to do with the actual thing. And so the consumer doesn't really know what to find. And I imagine that must be somewhat true for companies as well. So how do you guys think about sort of making sure you're elevating those types of listings as well?
Yeah, so there's two things. One is there's what appears on Indeed's internal search. So if someone has, I don't know, SEO manager, SEO director, senior SEO specialist or whatever, and we think, hey, those are probably the same thing based on the skills and the content of the job site, we'll basically make sure that if someone searches for SEO director, and then we have a head of SEO job that will show that. And it's exactly like any search engine like Google or Yelp or Amazon or whatever. There's a whole process to build synonym rings to understand like what the synonyms between the various terms are. And then an ML component that, again, 6 commonalities between jobs. And so that all comes together to form the search results page. So you say like, director of SEO as your job search. And then on that page is a head of SEO job because we think that might be useful. So then you've got a page which is director of SEO in New York or something. And then the next step is, well, do we want that to go into Google's index enough? I don't know if people care about those jobs to have that in Google. And the machine learning model I mentioned earlier is that really. So we're saying, all right, well, there's 200 people a month coming to the site searching for director of SEO jobs in New York, and we've got a lot of jobs for it, and a lot of people end up applying, so it's not a huge bounce rate. All these things come together and like 10 other things, and we say, yeah, that's a good page. We want that to be in Google, and only then will it show up in our internal linking sitemap XML. We'll take off the no index tag and stuff.
So brilliant.
I don't understand. That's machine learning, or this is manual intervention to try to Is it machine learning, or is it you're making the decisions by yourself as a team?
The indexation is machine learning, yeah. So I mean, not to get too much in and give it the secret sauce, but basically there's a dozen of variables. I mentioned a few of them. So like number of people coming to Indeed and searching for something, how much traffic it's got retrospectively, what kind of traffic it gets from other paid media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so those all come together into a score. That score is effectively, I get beaten up by a data analyst for saying this, but basically it's effectively a prediction of how much SEO traffic that individual URL is going to get. And then each market has a threshold. So we'll say, all right, I expect, if it's going to get more than X traffic, then it goes into contention for, getting into internal link placements, the sitemap XML and so on. There's a bit more logic on top of that. So there's an interesting trade-off. So then you've got like, let's say, I'm just making these numbers up, so please don't quote them. But let's say you've got like 1 billion potential intents that you might want to put into Google that you know about. So, marketing director New York, or I don't know, whatever, accountant London, whatever. And then you say, all right, maybe there's 10% of those that you think, okay, yeah, that's probably going to get some SEO traffic. And so those go into the Sitemap XMLs and all the rest of it. And then after that, we do some stuff with that SEO score around weighting internal link placements and stuff like that. So something that's very high potential, get traffic, gets more links and so on. But it's a bit, there's a tension between like high SEO score and relevance of the link placements. So it gets a bit nuanced there. But yeah, that's fundamentally how you can think of it. It's just a big regression analysis at its core. There's a big regression analysis, gives you a number. There's a threshold for that number. And if it's above it, then it goes onto the site, basically.
Do you follow that same approach when you have a job title you've never seen before?
Yeah. So it goes on. So if you go on and you search for, what chief yogurt weaver or something like that, we're like, okay, that's interesting. But if no one else ever searches for that, then obviously it won't get through. But if hundreds, thousands of people start showing up and searching for that search, then we'll be like, this must be a job people care about. And assuming, I'm kind of being facetious, but like assuming there were jobs for that and people were applying for them and having a good experience or whatever, then at that point, the model will be like, that looks like legit to me. So it goes onto the site.
I hope you're not giving away a trade secret here, Chris. We just had a conversation with a LinkedIn ads expert a couple of weeks ago who was telling us how poor LinkedIn's title targeting is with the advertising product, where 50% of the titles people use in their LinkedIn profile just don't exist anywhere else. They're like the chief garbage man. Meanwhile, you're the CEO of a huge waste removal company. So that is one limitation of LinkedIn's advertising, is just you can't reach people by their title because
interesting.
Only one person with that title.
That's fascinating. Just as a complete aside, a long time ago, because I built this tool. Have you ever heard of the concept of LinkedIn X-ray search? Basically, what recruiters do sometimes, if they don't want to pay for a LinkedIn account, probably shouldn't say this if that guy's listening, but they'll do a site command in Google. So site linkedin.com, chief garbage officer, and that brings back obviously the whole bunch of profiles. So I built basically a little form that you can basically structure those searches for. Not everyone wants to go and write a big long Boolean string to Google. So you just go onto this site and you basically flex for hint and it gives you the string to do that search. It's been running along. It gets kind of a few thousand users a day and it's been running along for years now. So I've got this huge database that's creaking along that has all these different job titles in there. I should really do something with it actually. But yeah, I do see a lot of, in that context as well, I see a lot of interesting job titles. And also I have to say, I probably shouldn't say this, but a whole bunch of profanities. I don't know what the audience for this podcast is, so I won't start quoting them, but like a lot of, we had to work really hard to get like profane like job searches. There's a lot of people search for stuff which is, not safe for work, let's say. So yeah, it's
like adult industry. Is that what you mean? Like along those lines?
That, and also, can I curse in this podcast? Is that okay? Is it an adult audience? So people are just like I want a shit job, whatever. And then you end up saying if enough people say that, then the model left to its own devices will be like, hey, shit jobs, people want them. And so if you search for that, then you'll end up with shit jobs at top Google, which just looks terrible. And so again, we have another like AI based process which basically goes through and goes, that's kind of adult. We're going to knock that one out. So yeah, that's a little nuance of the industry.
I pity the group searching for, I'm looking for a shit job.
You wouldn't believe it, mate. So so to build these models, we had to have like human reviewers go through these things. And so we did a first pass and kind of like weaned out the ones which thought, hang on, those look a bit suspect. And then these huge, great big lists of queries go over to because obviously we operate in 60 different markets. So you have a lot of different languages to do. So you pass that over to the Japanese language expert who'll go through and go, yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. And I'd be like, I am so sorry. You look at some of these queries and some lovely person who spends their time normally translating microcopy on tooltips or something. You're like, hey, I've just sent you a massive list of profanities. I'm so sorry. Just do your best. So now it's more or less automated. We just kind of review it semi-regularly. But that's a nuance of the field.
Maybe another nuance is, you technically have two audiences, right? You have the businesses that you have to pay attention to some degree because they're the ones who are doing the listings. Certainly the job seekers are what sort of provides really the value of the site. I guess, so if you go to the homepage today, it's clearly geared toward a job seeker. How do you guys think about, those relationships with the businesses? Do you create sort of separate content for them, or?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. By market, there's like root terms in, let's say, the recruitment industry, which are pretty consistent. So, for example, in the US and most English-speaking country, and actually some non-English-speaking countries, like surprisingly France, for example, it's just the word jobs. Except people will search for skill or contract type or company or whatever, jobs, and that's really easy to target because you add that as a suffix to the query or whatever. For employers, it's a bit more nuanced, but it's typically things something like hire app thing. And so we just create content. On the employer side, I don't directly look after that, but it's mostly informational content. So if you search for like post a job, it's very heavily monetized SERP, but we'll rank there as posted. I think we're number one. Post a job for a thing, or just post a job generally. And then beyond that, like in sort of the SEO element of it, we'll just look at like common employer questions. And then we create long form content that answers that, so we'll just do, if someone's looking for like, how do I set up a 401k for my employees? How do I do health insurance for my employees? Stuff like that. So we'll basically rank around that. But it's honestly, on both cases, it's pretty straightforward. And then we do see like people getting lost. So we'll see like employers come to the job search and vice versa. And we've got like a little process that says, well, obviously we want links and say, hey, you're looking to post a job because it's over here. We have a little process where if we really think someone's an employer and they're kind of wandering on job search lost, we'll be like, hey, are you an employer? Do you want to post a job? Because it's over here. And we'll sort of intervene and try and push them to the right place. But yeah, it's generally from an SEO perspective, quite straightforward, actually.
I was curious, when you guys are creating content, you use the example of how do I set up a 401k for my employees? Do you guys think through like the application of EAT, or do you sort of rely on the strength of the domain to sort of overcome some of that?
More of the latter, really. So maybe I'm sort of a bit old-fashioned. I guess when I think of like traditional SEO EAT, it's about like author bylines and stuff like that. It's basically saying, hey, I'm an expert in this field. And we have a career advice section, which is targeted on like, how to write a resume for various positions, how to write a cover letter, how to resign gracefully from your job, workplace etiquette, stuff like that. And it's been really successful over the years. We basically said, all right, well, people who are looking for a job are typically finding us, but people who are like maybe thinking about sort of changing career, we'll try and help those guys too by giving them this content. And I think because of the strength of the domain, that long form content does tremendously well in search. And for those articles, we did do that traditional EAT kind of or EAT thing of having a like an author photo and byline and stuff. And it's not my team that does that, it's an adjacent team, but I think it was more really about building credibility with the audience, really, because SEOs have kind of ruined the internet to a certain extent with just like endless content. And so I think that team really wanted to be like, hey, we actually know what we're talking about here. I remember I commissioned some content this was way before like the LLM revolution that we're living through now, but commissioned content on like eBay just for category pages. And he was like, all right, like fridges, digital fridges or something. And the content that came back is, when choosing a fridge, make sure the fridge fits in your kitchen. It must keep food cold. And I'm like, oh God, this is so worthless. Like it's just such redundant information. And so I think the team that write this content for Indeed is very focused on making sure it's actually stuff that might be useful. And really, I think the byline stuff is really just about trying to say to users, hey, we're not just like spewing this out, we actually know what we're talking about. So there's that. But then, yeah, I mean, your point was exactly right. We really rely on the strength of the brand for that. So we've got an economist team that they do, because we kind of know so many jobs, like a lot of like the Federal Reserve and various central banks and stuff will rely on that for just like, they're looking at inflation and economic trends and stuff. And so if you go to data.indeed.com, there's a really cool sort of economist focused data dashboard there that you can slice and dice, see what's happening to job postings for tech jobs in California or something. And you can see over time, like salaries and trends and stuff like that. So we do stuff like that rather than explicit like EEAT stuff,
That's very cool. I didn't know that was open to the public. I mean, I always hear about economists talking about Indeed data. I just thought they had special permission from you guys, but you make it all public?
Yeah, pretty much. I think we do. I don't know. It's kind of not my area again, but we have like, as I say, this team of economists. And I think they do special stuff for like if the Federal Reserve called, we'd probably like give them some special stuff. But It's super depressing, man. I guess a lot of your audience like work in tech. Don't look at US tech jobs. It's about 2022. It's horrendous. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. More and more states across the US now are mandating salaries as part of the job title. Sorry, as the job ad. And so we've got pretty good like salary data as well. So we're actually part of the same company as Glassdoor, and so they have like really good salary data, and we kind of we make use of that too. So you can kind of see salary trends and job posting, and then things like I think it's like pretty ad hoc right now, but you can look at like, for example, if certain skills are being mentioned in a job title, so like how many jobs are mentioning AI and stuff like that. So it's quite cool. I should really do more to kind of build that into the core experience. I think for now, yeah, we kind of do stuff like that to demonstrate expertise, I guess, and authority in that area rather than telling people.
I would imagine it's a nice little link hub as well. I mean, it's having that data available seems like a natural place for people to reference and point links to.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's terribly well marketed. As I say, it's kind of like it's a team of economists that run it, and they're not really part of the commercial team. So I'm in the product team, but kind of part of the broader growth teams. Ultimately, I need to bring more job seekers into the site. But that team is really just focused on sort of like the academia of it rather than the growth of it. So it's not really, I think, exploited as a link opportunity. But yeah, you would imagine. I mean, I think the St. Louis Fed, which is the Federal Reserve sort of another term there. Site, we tend to get cited by a lot of journalists and stuff. I think that links out to Indeed data, certainly references Indeed data. So stuff like that, yeah, is super useful.
You said you're part of the product team, not the commercial team?
Yeah, so part of the product team, that's right. Yeah, so I've bounced around in my career a bit between like marketing growth teams and products, but yeah, I sit in the whole SEO team sits in the product team. Exactly, yeah. So
how do you fit in within the product team? I assume there's advertising, there's PR.
Well, so there's so my boss, for example, will be responsible for SEO, but also like mobile apps and what else he does now, but like a lot of stuff, like maybe some data quality stuff. I can't remember now, but whatever. So yeah, there's various different things, and inside that is SEO, and our OKRs are around. In my case, it would be like new job seekers coming in via organic search. So yeah, that's how we fit in. But then also we are also kind of part of the marketing organization. So marketing will then have like paid search and display advertising, social, or whatever. So our OKR kind of rolls up to theirs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to dig into that only because I think I saw some LinkedIn advertising on Perplexity. Would that be right if I saw a LinkedIn ad on Perplexity?
Yeah, Perplexity does run ads around specific queries. I don't think like Perplexity just doesn't have traction with users right now. So we I don't know what I should say, but we dabbled with it.
Okay.
Sponsored prompts, but it just really isn't very like, honestly, if the standalone LLM, so excluding Google, my both internal and external data says to me that ChatGPT is really the only service that's got any kind of consumer traction. Really, there's ChatGPT, and then there's everything else.
Yeah. Did you have a chance? I guess sounds like it was just a short advertising test with Perplexity. But I wonder, is there an opportunity there for an SEO professional to try to do some like prompt discovery?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to say too much, but basically, yeah, we did kind of like, they shared some anonymized prompts and stuff with us, and that was super interesting actually, because when we're all, I guess maybe we were talking a second about like LLM visibility monitoring and stuff. And the core problem is that unlike search, where there's pretty well understood and well known, like either the service providers themselves will give it out for ads, or ISP based tools like prompt or plugin based tools like SimilarWeb or whatever will give you data on search terms. No one really knows truly outside these tools themselves what people are prompting them for, except we did get this data that kind of gave us a bit of an idea. Super interesting, super noisy, to be honest. I mean, you've got this kind of classic shape of demand search. We've got the few head terms, maybe some body, and then a lot of the classic long tail. Really, like, I think on these AI-based services, it's basically flat to the axes. You've probably got like a tiny number of like head terms, for want of a better term, and then basically an infinite number of prompts. And when you look at what people are actually prompting them for, like a lot of it is so contextual. So it's like, if you look at like a mid-prompt conversation, it's like, so how do I optimize my resume for this? And you're like, well, without the what precedes it, it's utterly pointless. Or maybe there's a file associated with it which you don't obviously see. And there's a relatively small number of prompts that we could take from that and go, yeah, that's something we want to actually look at.
So maybe I got a two-part question. The first, just to clarify, it sounds like the Perplexity advertising tool, not really a help to SEO pros right now. Fair?
I'm going to say, I don't want to say too much, but I'm going to say no. I honestly, just because of the scale of Perplexity, I just feel that it's not that useful really. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting looking at some, certainly this was like 6 months ago or something. So it's kind of like, it was useful then to get like just an intuitive sense of what people are using them for. But
Right.
I don't necessarily think that it would be something I would rely on necessarily.
And then a follow-up, I saw a recent post you had about the UDM equals 50. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe.
Yeah. So obviously, as I see it, there are two players in this game right now. Maybe that'll change, but right now you've got Google and you've got OpenAI. Google's obviously pushing AI mode increasingly hard, and there's this UDM parameter which it basically tells you or determines what experience Google puts on its SERP. So like images, news, jobs, whatever, has its own unique value for that UDM parameter. And so, yeah, I mean, just going through, it looks like Google is using UDM 54 AI mode. So because unlike ChatGPT, I always get this the wrong way around. Forgive me, but I think I'm right in saying that like Google is a post request. That is that the user submission is visible in the URL. That means that a tool like SimilarWeb or ComScore or whatever can then look at, does this URL contain UDM 50? Yes, it does. All right, great. What was the prompt? What was the search query that prompted, I guess, users to go over to toggle into that experience? So yeah, again, it was just in service of trying to understand what people are using this for. That was the intent.
I think that's the challenge right now, right? With a specific keyword, you have a pretty good sense of what the intent is. Maybe even if it's a little blurred, like transactional and informational. With LLMs, just thinking about my own use, it is very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And the follow-up prompts don't necessarily carry that specificity, because now you're talking about something within the response that's also specific.
Right. Yeah.
Really.
And I see people are working on like LLM visibility tools because it's feel like valid criticisms which will say things like, oh, it's completely contextual to the user. So like, you just putting a generic prompt in doesn't make any sense, or it's obviously non-deterministic. So it might be different every time anyway. And therefore, like, why even do this? My personal kind of feeling is yes, that's true. As you guys mentioned, there's like infinite prompts and they're all extremely contextual. My feeling is really that it's still worth measuring, just because there is, like, if you're ranking for the default, I guess, like the default queries are non-contextualized to that user, and for something, which might be less specific than the thing they're asking, then at least directionally you can see compared to other competing brands, like how you're doing. So it's not like perfect, but it's at least an indication, and I think it's a relatively, and it's kind of the same in Google. I mean, Google contextualizes or customizes your answer based on your previous search history. All these tools are coming in, they're doing a request from a given location, and there's no guarantee that your users are coming in from that location as well. So there's some of the same kind of pushbacks applied to them. So I think that picking some representative prompts and then measuring them is still valuable for looking at what's happening at the top of the funnel, if you like, for AI traffic. And we call them synthetic prompts, which is a nice way of saying we made them up. So we basically use, like, people also ask some of that data I mentioned earlier, a bit of common sense, and we kind of come together, and that's how we build out our prompt tracking population.
I was just going to ask that, because a lot of the AI tools that have come out who will track this sort of stuff rely on the customer to define the initial set of prompts. Mm-hmm. And I've signed up for a couple just to play around, and every time I'm hoping that they're going to suggest the prompts for me. So you mentioned, do you have any tips for anyone when they're starting to think about, like, what are a core set of prompts that I should, track? Like, do you start with the head term, like jobs, and then work down from there? Or do you really look towards something that's longer tailed and, I don't know, maybe something you're seeing get shown up in Google Search Console that's, 10 words long, and you could theoretically assume that's an AI mode query?
Yeah, I mean, the two tools we use is a Profound and SEO Clarity, and both of them have I don't know, you call it like a prompt research feature right now. Honestly, I think it's pretty in like a nascent field, but they are saying that, I think I'm right in saying, I'm regurgitating someone else has told me here, so it might be completely off base. So pinch of salt. But I believe that the ChatGPT plugin, I think, does make a post request, so it is visible in the URL, so ISP can pick that up. And I believe some Android devices, rather horrifyingly, will like effectively keylog their users. And so I think from those sources, there are some providers now that will give you some indication. It's a different methodology actually. They when you, for example, Profound looks at if you search in Profound for a prompt or do that prompt research, it'll give you the very roughly estimated volume for that substring. So if you say like resume, it's not telling you the number of people who have just gone to ChatGPT and searched for resume. It's all the prompts that it knows about or is estimated that contain the word resume. So it's very different. So there are some tools there. Yeah, the one that I found was super useful actually is People Also Asked. So we use, is it alsoasked.com? And they've got some really good data on the People Also Asked values. ChatGPT, it's super normalized, and I don't know how useful it is, but it does have a suggested prompt function. So if you go and start typing your prompt, it'll give you some example prompts. And then, yeah, just a kind of a dose of common sense, to be honest with you, on what people might be using it for. As I say, for us, it was kind of slightly informed by that like raw prompt data we got, so it kind of gave us a bit of a direction. But a lot of it is really those different data sources, put it all together and say, yeah, we think reasonably this is a good set of prompts to track.
I wanted to ask about log file analysis. Correct me if I'm wrong. On a relatively recent podcast, I'm forgetting who the host was, but you mentioned something about tracking ChatGPT user agent as sort of like a proxy for citation mentions.
Yep.
I assume you're using some sort of like log file analysis to sort of pluck that out.
Yeah. Users and bots are all logged. So all the analytics I look at is log file analysis. So so it's relatively straightforward. It's actually amazing now because we do have some JavaScript instrumentation, like we have GA on the site, but don't typically use it. So everything is logged in the user log into the server logs, and then obviously we extract that and take subsets of that for different indices we then actually query for our analytics. And it's amazing now because in the world of LLMs, we have LLMs, so you can go and just do like a natural language query. So like show me all the LLM user agents that have queried this page type in Japan in the last 30 days or something. Get the SQL query straight away, or actually some like proprietary query language we have internally, but whatever, let's say SQL query, and then just run it and it's great. And you can really kind of get that fine-grained nuance control then. It's quite difficult with a GUI-based tool like GA. And yeah, exactly. So with that ChatGPT user thing, not always, but often when ChatGPT cites a URL, it will send off a request at runtime to that URL. I assume it's just to check the page is still live and the content is still what it was when it sort of first indexed it. And then you can kind of get a rough idea of what's being cited. Certainly directionally, it's not every time. So it's not every time, but it seems to be a lot of times. So if you zoom out to like a page level, like a subset of pages, you can definitely see like, this is the number of times people are cited, category pages are being cited, individual job pages for me, and so on and so forth, homepage. And so that gives you an interesting insight into what's showing up. And then obviously you can see the clicks that come from that. And so therefore you can derive a rough CTR and you can see conversion. Then obviously you have that data I mentioned, the profound SEO clarity, whatever data up top, which shows you the visibility. So it's very, very nascent compared to SEO, but you can start to see a kind of funnel between visibility to conversion a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're a little bit ahead of the game as far as big enterprise companies go and starting to already try to understand and optimize for LLMs. At this point, you probably have 1,000 prompts that are important to you and you're optimizing for them. Is that fair?
To a degree, yeah, to a degree. It tends to be not so much we're going after specific. Again, it's programmatic, so we're trying to do things at very large programmatic scale. So it's not like I'm like, we're like the second most visible part-time jobs. We should do something there. We're trying to do things at a template level that will sort of lift all boats, if that makes sense.
So you come up with your initial set of prompts that are important to you, and you say, maybe it's Profound that you use to say, how am I doing against these important prompts? And you say, oh my God, there's 900 of them that I have some traction against, like 90% of the prompts that are important to me. Then you've got to kind of reverse engineer. Well, before I was doing any optimization, for LLMs, what did we do right? And what are the kinds of things that you're seeing in your reverse engineering of just by best practice from some other discipline, you've had this early success?
Honestly, the absolute truth of it is we started doing a lot of this in January, and I had no preconceptions about how well Indeed would be doing in these surfaces. And so we set it all up, as I said, we mentioned, we chose the prompts, etc. And I was like peeking out, and I was like, oh my God, we did really well. And I meant to do this. This was always my plan. And a lot of it's been born out of the pre-existing SEO success, actually. So when ChatGPT, for example, was relying very heavily on Bing's index, Indeed does extremely well in Bing, even better than Google. And so when ChatGPT was going off and doing its RAG thing to synthesize its answers, Indeed was just showing up a lot there. And so that it's really been, honestly, it's not a satisfying answer, but it's really been traditional SEO that's really, I guess, got us to the most visible site in that job space from day one. Now, in terms of the things we're doing, honestly, again, nothing revolutionary. I think the whole world and his dog is now just doing FAQs across the site, because they do really seem to be just having that very plain answer, here's the question, here's the answer. They seem to do really, really well when it comes to influencing responses. So we're doing a lot of testing like that around that now. We do something called cause and impact studies. So we'll basically take a bunch of pages and we'll say, all right, this is the metric that we care about. Maybe it's traffic from LLMs, maybe it's citations or mentions or just regular SEO traffic, whatever. We'll have some metric we care about. We'll group together a bunch of pages that typically perform similarly, and then we'll have like a synthetic control. So we say, okay, this is what happens. So you'd reasonably expect if we do this here, this will continue to happen. But if we make this intervention here, what happens? Oh, it goes up, and therefore we'll be able to look at the difference pre-post and put a number on that. So that's the methodology we use, and then we just try various interventions, a lot of FAQs, to be honest with you, to try and influence that. LLM traffic is probably our least noisy metric, actually. So we'll try and influence that metric. Yeah.
I asked that question thinking I was teeing you up to give a compliment to your PR.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it is. Honestly, the dirty secret of SEO that I don't tell my boss is that I personally think, this is just my observation over a lot of time working in it, is that to do well in SEO, really it's you need to have a site that's indexable and all the rest. You need to have the right content on that. Fine, yes, the table stakes. Everyone can do that, really. And then you need to have a good product that people actually like, and that's probably 40% of the challenge. The other 40%, I think, is brand. So the PR team, the brand teams going out there to encourage people to search for you, and then really the stuff that I do, tinkering around with links and indexation and metadata and stuff like that all day. That's really the last 20%. If you have an awful site that no one knows about, then it doesn't matter how good your SEO or SEO, just get nowhere. And vice versa as well, actually. Some awful sites, Craigslist still ranks for a bunch of jobs. It hasn't changed since 1995. And so, if people like you and they find your site useful, then, you're going to do well. So I guess, yeah, I don't say it because I want to sound important internally, but truly, the brand team is probably the real SEO team, to be honest.
You mentioned ChatGPT using Bing results. There's been a couple of case studies on LinkedIn and elsewhere that are saying it's only using Google results now. I've also heard that it still grounds the response in Bing results, but if it's something that Bing doesn't have a good response for, then it goes to Google. Do you have a strong sense of where that is today, in terms of where they're actually getting their results from?
Yeah, I think so one of those people on LinkedIn was Gus Peloggia, who's it's kind of almost like a R&D PM. So he does a lot of the kind of forward thinking stuff. And yeah, he reached much the same conclusion that they're coming from Google. I believe they're coming from Google. On the traditional kind of RAG grounding, I'm pretty sure it's coming from Google. I heard that it was coming via some intermediary scraping service that they'd kind of sneakily engaged. And that's why we had this whole thing over the weekend of Google disabling pagination parameters in the URL. But anyway, I'm not quite sure about that. But I think I might be saying, I don't want to spread fake news here, but I think the agent experience is still coming from Bing. So if you give it a generic prompt I don't know, find me a job, you toggle on the agent, and then you say, I want to find a job in my locality or whatever, then I think I'm right in saying I've kind of put them in two windows and watched them. The results that come back on that agent are Bing. So the virtual machine that it uses is using Bing. I don't want to spread fake news, but that's been my assessment based on some non-scientific testing.
I mean, it would make sense that they wouldn't rewrite the whole way that they've approached it from the ground up, although I guess totally possible. So it would make sense that there are 4 different queries or prompts, I guess in this case. They may be using different methodologies to try to get to an answer.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing with agents is they get blocked all the time. I don't know if you've like experimented with Operator or the agent mode or whatever. It's like Cloudflare is just like agent poison, and so, or Google reCAPTCHA. And so I would assume when they're doing this, they want to go with like a friendly service that's allowed them on, rather than just going, okay, I'm going to search for this for you. I was blocked. I'm going to search for this for you. I was blocked. Oh, well, good luck. That's not a great experience for their users. So I'd assume even if they, for whatever reason, prefer to use Google data for their RAG, maybe their agents, which are very prone to getting blocked, maybe they want to go with something they can rely on a bit more, Conspiracy theory, but maybe.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I guess since we're talking about LLMs, Nick Leroy was one of our first guests this season. He runs SEOjobs.com, and I think he just launched PPCjobs.com. I just pinged him real quickly to see if he would have any questions of interest for you. And he was curious about the impact of non-click searches, right? Just generally traffic sort of going away. Are you guys thinking about, or I guess, how are you thinking about supplementing that traffic? Are you paying attention to Reddit, for example, or some of these other platforms that are getting elevated in search and LLMs for that matter? So are you thinking about more of a distributed strategy there?
Yeah, I mean, the big chunk of traffic that everyone's feeding right now is really on informational searches. And just by the nature, we don't make money by necessarily selling ad impressions. So it kind of hurts us less, if you like. So we do have a ton of content out there around, like I said, how to write resume, how to write cover letters, and also a bunch of salary information and stuff. So if you want to know what the salary is for a given job title, location, or company or something, we have all that information out there. Obviously now AIOs is doing a great job of answering that in the SERP. And so you see a reduction in CTR. No surprises or controversy there. My position on that one, our position on that one is that really that was never a directly commercial play. People would do those kind of searches, they would get the information they need, they would move away. And we were content to provide that information because, we want to help people get jobs, but also it's kind of a brand play effectively. Hopefully they come get a good experience, they feel warm and fuzzy. And when they do want to come to find a job, which is where we make money, then they would come to us rather than a competitor. So that was always the play. Our position on this is that if we are appearing in these AI surfaces, whether it's AIOs, AI mode, ChatGPT, whatever, then yes, it's kind of a less rich experience that someone coming to the site and see the logo, maybe getting some peripheral messaging or whatever. But on the flip side, like AIO's impressions are huge. Like a lot of people see them much more than would click to any individual website, even a big website. And also people trust them. People look at them and it's kind of like a recommendation from a trusted friend almost. So yeah, on one hand, you're not getting that rich experience where they come to the site. But on the other hand, we're getting the brand benefit from something, I guess, that people trust, saying, hey, this is a really good website. This is where I got this information. This is something you should believe in. So it's kind of brand by a different means, really. Transactional searches, obviously, I mean, again, not giving away too many amazing secrets. Like they haven't been impacted in the same way by AI overview, CTR cannibalization. At some point, I do kind of expect agents to start to eat into that a little bit. Transactional searches for e-commerce and job search and travel, every kind of transactional industry out there. But when that happens, I honestly think, again, we'll see how it plays out. Who knows? But again, you look at how these agents work, and if you tell it to go to Indeed.com, it'll go to Indeed.com and it'll do what you want it to do. If you tell it to go and just find me a job in this case, or find a vintage item for sale or whatever it is, then it'll go to search. It'll go to search, and you literally can see it like clicking on the results just like a user would. So I honestly feel like it's just SEO with extra steps, actually. So I personally don't think there's a massive existential crisis there. I think it's just going to be maybe a nuance on what we do right now.
I heard you say SEOs are more important than ever.
Yeah, no, really, totally. I genuinely do think that. Okay, so here's my little pitch. Most it might be Coke because I have a huge mortgage, but this is it. So people, there's fundamental principles. There are more goods and services than people could possibly know about in their own head at any given point. People are going to want to eat at restaurants and get jobs and buy things and take insurance out, whatever. And there's lots of brands competing for them. And like these services, these AI-powered services, I believe are just fundamentally more useful than traditional search. And so more people are going to turn to them in future than maybe in the past would have just like relied on brand reputation, saw an offline ad, got a referral from a friend or whatever. I think more people are going to just go straight to their LLM of choice and get that recommendation. And therefore, SEOs, as we do manipulate algorithmic responses, like we're going to be more valuable than ever in terms of like pointing people to our employers rather than someone else. So I think effectively it's going to be a really bumpy few years, and like traffic forecasts and stuff are going to have to come down quite a lot. But the actual value that we generate in terms of like getting business in, I think is probably going to be more than ever important. I hope. As I say, big mortgage. I'm kind of hoping.
There is this train of thought, or many people saying that the traffic that does come from LLMs, even though it may be a smaller chunk, tends to be much higher converting. So I think there's probably truth in that.
Yeah, and also like that's absolutely true. That's my experience too. And also, there's a lot of, we started just asking, it's like very, very basic, but like as an employer comes in and posts a job, we just say, hey, where do you hear about us? And we're seeing people maybe not clicking directly, but again, recommendation from a friend, people are coming in and they're posting jobs. So.
Yeah. All right. Getting to the rapid fire round.
Oh, okay.
If you're ready.
Oh, hit me.
All right. You had a lot of good tips around Google Search Console, sort of breaking down XML sitemaps, things like that. If there was any metric that doesn't exist today in Google Search Console, what would you recommend that they add?
The one that caused most pain for me was the enhancements section of the site. I believe that as gospel, and then I think it was from Google. I think I actually reached out to them and said, like, what's going on with this? It turns out that at least for big sites, I think, maybe all sites, those numbers, so like on the the job details, job listings, reports or whatever, they're all just samples. They're samples that it directionally tells you what's going on. I'm like, that's not very helpful because I actually need a real number. So if they could make that real numbers, that would help my life a lot.
Especially for sites of your size, I can only imagine it's significantly sampled.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, it is. So I was absolutely scratching my head. Like, I had a conversion, like a pyramid. This, these are all the jobs you put in. Cool. And then all of a sudden, like the number of jobs visible in Google for jobs, which is like crazy little bit in the pyramid. And then more jobs are getting traffic. I was like, what's going on? So there was that. And then also what I would love to see, what's the guy's name? Daniel Wassenberg or something, the PM for things. If he's listening to this podcast, like taking the crawl and indexation data into the Google Search Console bulk export, that would be massive. So I rely on that a lot to sort of as a sense check for internal data. But if we could take that and put that into our internal data lake as well, massive game changer. So yeah, I love that.
I would love for them to split out AI mode searches versus traditional search. I mean, that would be.
It makes impressions and CTR something almost kind of worth this now, right? Like, because you have no idea. Yeah, so that too.
All right. What's your high score in Maze Speed Scrabble?
That's great. Yeah, so I guess for context, your listeners, pandemic locked in. My wife came up with my game where we would just like come up with names in Scrabble really quickly, and then we just did that for fun because we were bored out of our mind. And then one day I was trying to learn React. Actually, I thought, I should probably learn to do like coding React because it's important. It's a big technology. So I sat down and I kind of codified this game in React, hand coded it, and then. Yeah, literally, a few months ago, I stumped up for the Claude premium subscription, and I linked up this GitHub repo with put this game in with Claude code. And I was like, is this any good? And it was like, I mean, the LLMs are unrelentingly positive, so it must have been right. It was like, no, that's actually not very good at all. Do you want me to fix everything? And I was like, yeah, okay. So it literally went like this. I just turned on accepted all changes, and it completely rebuilt it from scratch, like infinitely better, look better, perform better, better UI and everything. So I showed everyone what my high score is, but I was humbled by Claude there.
That's amazing. I mean, vibe coding is a little addicting, but also like incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
Like how quick it can spit something out.
Anyway, I've got a whole thing on that, but yes, it's especially for me as well. Game changer has been, like I said, just SQL queries. I can like blitz out 200 line SQL query now with a few English language sentences. So it's been a game changer.
What's this isn't a rapid fire round question, but I guess it could be. What's your favorite tool to code with? LLM tool to code with?
It depends on what I'm doing. If I'm doing just like a personal hobby site or whatever, I would typically use VS Code, old fashioned, I guess, really, but VS Code. I was using the GitHub, I forgot what it's called now, the GitHub Premium tool. That's like basically fancy what I suggest. Got rid of that, and now I'm using Claude Code, looking at my local repo, and then I'm using the terminal inside VS Code to vibe code effectively, and then just tinkering with it. the hard thing is it's so easy just to accept all the changes at once, and then sometimes it gets itself in an absolute mess. So I think that the pro tip would be for any vibe coders from me, based on bitter experience, just check it into Git every time it does something. Check it into Git so that if it gets too far down the line, you realize something has gone terribly wrong, you can revert to the commit before it went horribly wrong. It's funny enough, a good friend of mine is vibe coding app now as everyone, and he's like, it just went, he basically vibe coded himself into complete chaos. And I was like, you got to use Git, man. You got to use source control, because otherwise, you're gonna get in a mess. So Claude is my go-to, and then regular check-ins with source control to save my sanity. Yeah,
source control is huge. Yeah, that's a good tip. All right, 2 more. Any tips for writing a great dev ticket?
So I'm kind of a PRD monster. Like, every question you ask me comes up with a 3-page document with sub-bullets and everything like that. And I tend to use, so the framework I use, was one thing I remember from business school, was SOS stack. So the situation, the objectives, the strategies and tactics, the actions that we're actually going to do, in the control, like how you're going to measure it. And so I just put everything in that format, and that's just good context for engineers. Obviously, if I'm writing a small bug fix ticket, it's not necessary, but typically I'm writing like epics that will then get delivered by individual product managers. And so I tend to structure everything in that SOS stack format, which just, I don't know, it's just a way of forcing me to think clearly about things. I find putting that control, that measurement thing at the end, it really makes me think more closely about the objectives I'm setting for that project. That it's all very well saying, oh, we'll make traffic go up, but then when you actually go and try and write the query, you say, hey, we're going to measure with this query, you realize the data you want isn't there, or it doesn't quite work like that, or whatever. So, yeah, it's really helpful.
Nice. All right, last one. Any books you would recommend? Could be self-help, could be fiction.
Let me think. When was the last time I read a book?
Audiobook.
I'm reading a couple right now. I've got a couple of open books. The author is called Chip Nguyen. Oh yeah, Designing Machine Learning Systems, Designing Machine Learning Systems and AI Engineering, Building Applications with Foundation Models. I find it quite useful. There's a really good sort of non-SEO podcast I listen to, which is called Machine Learning Street Talk, which is it's kind of like an AI researcher podcast. A lot of people who are on the frontier of the sort of AI research go onto it. And it's probably 50% over my head, to be honest with you. It's quite abstract and a little bit philosophical, actually, but it's super helpful for understanding how these models work. And then those books I just mentioned by Chip Nguyen, she's really writing about, from an engineer's perspective, how you build them. And then when you think, I'm starting to think about how's Google actually choosing these results for its RAG, synthesizing its answer, looking at it from an engineering perspective, whether it's from researchers or from more practical, how is this actually built. It's actually very helpful, I find. So yeah, I'll probably go with that.
Yeah, early on, I took some classes on just general basics of machine learning. And as LLMs have exploded, that sort of foundation was incredibly helpful just to sort of understand what's happening there. All right. Before we let you go, we started a little bit of a prediction tradition. I'd love to get your thoughts on, if you go to google.com in 12 months, what you expect the job search experience to be if someone's looking for, SEO director in Connecticut. How do you expect that to change in the next, 12 or 48 months?
Well, will people do that even? I don't know. Or will they kind of assign an agent to go and look for jobs for them, whether that's Google's agent or some standalone brand like Indeed's agent to do that? It's an open question. In terms of the traditional search experience, honestly, my conspiracy theory / doomer protection is there's going to be a ton more ads, I think, in future, because we're seeing a lot of, I've got some friends at Google and I kind of talk to them about how it's going and stuff. And they need to keep their stock price going up and to the right. And so they need to keep squeezing out more money from searches. And if searches are migrated to ChatGPT, or people are just getting their answers from AI mode, but not necessarily clicking ads as much, traditional search results are going to get a lot more ads, I think. So yeah, I'm kind of waiting for the day when the first page of search is basically all ads, to be honest with you. But hopefully not, but we'll see how it goes.
They got to replace that revenue somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris. This has been super insightful. Really appreciate you spending the time with us. Before we let you go, let everyone know where they can find you online.
I'm a very intermittent LinkedIner, so I'm sure you can find me on LinkedIn somewhere, but very rarely on it. And then I have a blog at qforquery.com, which I also very rarely update, but it's got whatever I do right, I put there. So.
All right. Amazing. Chris, thanks again. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.